You're listening to the I'm Busy Being Awesome podcast with Paula Engebretson, episode number 234. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I have to give you a disclaimer here. I have been quite sick and my voice is still recovering. And I just recorded this entire podcast with the wrong microphone and I'm going to record it again. So if my voice sounds a little bit shredded, that's why. But anyway, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are diving into the topic of hyperfocus, which is something that's talked about in passing in the ADHD space quite a bit. And since so many of us do experience hyperfocus at different times, I think it would be helpful to explore this topic quite a bit deeper, because hyperfocus is more than just this intense yet seemingly random ability to focus deeply at different times. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. What is hyperfocus and what are the pros and cons of having this experience, and how can we leverage hyperfocus in our daily lives? So let's dive in. What is hyperfocus? What are we actually talking about here? Well, I really like the definition given in the 2019 article called Hyperfocus, the Forgotten Frontier. I will link to this article in the show notes. I think it's a very interesting read. And in the article, the authors state that, quote, hyperfocus is a phenomenon that reflects on one's complete absorption in a task to a point where a person appears to completely ignore or tune out everything else. It is generally reported to occur when a person is engaged in an activity that's particularly fun or interesting. End quote. So in other words, hyperfocus is when someone is so focused on something, usually something they enjoy, that they ignore everything else. And I'm guessing that if you listen to this podcast, you probably know this experience well. You've probably been in a situation or many situations where you were working on a project or a task and suddenly you found yourself in this zone of such intense concentration that hours have flown by and you're so absorbed that you essentially forgot about everything else around you. Now, one of the things that I really appreciate about this article I mentioned by Ashnoff and Abu Akel is the way that they highlight the confusion around the term hyperfocus. They explain how there are so many different terms that people use to describe hyperfocus, let alone the fact that it's spelled in lots of different ways. Sometimes it's one word, sometimes it's two, sometimes there's a hyphen. All of this can really kind of muddy the water in what we're talking about when we're talking about hyperfocus. How do we know if it actually is? So to help create some clarity, the authors of this paper provided what they called a, quote, clear and testable definition of hyperfocus that comprised 4 criteria. So I want to share those 4 criteria here just so we can keep them in mind. So number 1 is to engage in hyperfocus, the task has to be engaging, fun, interesting, important, etc. Now, I'm also going to add in that it's helpful if it provides that right level of difficult that Dr. Ned Hallowell talks about quite often. I think that's a key component as well. So that's number 1. The activity provides some kind of engagement, you have an interest in it, it's fun, or it has that right level of difficult. The second criteria is hyperfocus is characterized by this intense state of sustained or selective attention. The third criteria is when engaged in hyperfocus, there is diminished perception of non-task relevant stimuli. What does that mean? Basically, it means everything else seems less important when you're down the rabbit hole of hyperfocus. And then number 4, during hyperfocus, task performance improves. Now, this last one, I'm a little bit less clear. I'm not sure that your performance is for sure going to improve every time, but I do think that when we are in hyperfocus, we're not getting distracted by everything else, which can impact what we're doing and what we're producing. Because when we're in hyperfocus, it really lets us hone in on the specific task and do that more effectively. Now, I want to mention that on the surface, this could sound pretty awesome. Hyperfocus could be great. And you know what? It is at times. It can lead to incredible productivity and a tremendous amount of output, especially if you are hyper-focused on something you want to do and you're not hyper focused on doom scrolling Instagram. But it can also be a situation that creates some neglect of other important areas of your life, right? Things like eating food, sleeping, drinking water, getting outside, doing other work that you want to do, tending to important relationships, making it to appointments and things. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's look at both the pros and the cons of hyperfocus in our lives. And let's start with the challenges. Okay, what are the obstacles associated with hyperfocus? And then we'll look at the potential benefits as well. I have 5 obstacles that I tend to see come up most often. Number 1 is greater time distortion. Okay. So when we are in a hyper-focused state, we often lose track of time. And I will offer that this is a very, very familiar experience for me. Hours can pass by without even realizing it. And that can lead to later nights, can lead to running out of time for other things I wanted to do. It can cut into the time I wanted to spend with other people. And when we already deal with intense time blindness, this distortion of time within hyperfocus can be super slippery. Now, the second obstacle that I often hear from people when they talk about being in hyperfocus is neglecting other responsibilities or priorities. So as I mentioned, hyperfocus does tend to narrow our attention to one specific thing, and that does make it really easy to overlook other areas in our lives. And so this can result in unfinished projects, unattended chores, missed deadlines, right? Number 3, hyperfocus, if left unchecked, can also have an impact on our health and our relationships. I've had so many clients share, oh, I just forgot to eat. I forgot to drink water for hours. I know for myself, if I am in a flow state, if I'm really hyper-focused, it's so easy for me to completely forget about my afternoon walk with Bruno until he doesn't stop nudging me out of the chair. I mean, he is my reminder. Similarly, how many of you have told yourself time and time again, oh, just 10 more minutes or 5 more minutes. And then all of a sudden, a few hours have gone by and it's too late for movie night or too late to meet with your friends for dinner. So again, if left unchecked, it can have us missing out on these other areas of our lives that we do want to prioritize. Number 4, the fourth obstacle when it comes to hyperfocus is simply its unpredictability. Hyperfocus isn't a controllable thing. We can't always rely on it. It might kick in at super inconvenient times or when we have other things that we want to be focused on. I'll say for myself, at least, my brain can get really frustrated at this internal tug where I know I have this other thing I wanted to do, I planned to do it, but I'm in such hyperfocus that it feels physically uncomfortable to shift what I'm doing. Right? It's like super painful to make that shift, and my brain doesn't like it. And then finally, number 5, we have the very real obstacle of burnout, which I did do a deep dive into several episodes back. It was episodes 219 and 220, a 2-parter on the ADHD burnout cycle. I will link to it in the show notes. But when we think about burnout through the lens of hyperfocus specifically, the intense mental energy that we expend, even if we genuinely enjoy the thing we're doing, that energy can quickly lead us to burnout when we're in such intense hyperfocus. We completely drain our battery with nothing left for anything else. And we find ourselves forced to either be in this low power mode or we just completely go past our capacity. Now, as I'm saying all of these obstacles, I do hear how negative they sound. And I'm not trying to just bring us all down and be super gloom and doom, but I do think it's really important for us to bring them into our awareness so we can plan for them, so that we can work with them and be aware of them. That awareness is everything. You will never hear me stop saying that on the podcast because awareness is everything. Now, before we get into that planning though, and planning for the obstacles, I do want to spend some time talking about some of the potential benefits of hyperfocus as well. How can it support us at times? Now, I want to offer that these statements, as always, are not black and white truths with a capital T. They aren't facts for every person or even the same person every time, okay? But this is what I have found to be common for myself and the hundreds of clients that I have worked with over the years. So let's talk about the benefits of hyperfocus. Number one, increased productivity. When we are focused on something that we want to be doing, that's an important clarification. But when we're focused on something we want to be doing, I think one of the most powerful benefits of hyperfocus is the potential for that increased productivity. Now, I'm not saying that when one is in hyperfocus, it's inherently more productive. But what I am saying is that hyperfocus allows us to get into flow and block out everything else that's potentially in the way of us moving forward. And when we're in that focus state and we're focused on something we want to be doing, that can be super supportive in getting the thing done more quickly, more effectively. Number two is space for greater creativity. For many of us, hyperfocus has this tendency to allow us to tap into our creativity more easily. When we can remove the noise, all the noise of distractions and comparisons, and really lock into the thing we're doing, I've noticed for myself and I've heard from clients that the brain really starts generating so many more innovative ideas and solutions. It can tap into our divergent thinking in a really powerful way. Number three is deep learning. And I have a feeling that several of you are going to resonate with this idea of hyperfocus and the way that it does allow you to go deep into a complex topic and learn so much. When it is that just right level of difficult, that's not too easy that we're bored doing it, but not so hard that we're just defeated. When it's that just right level, we're often able to zoom in on the details and the nuances, and the brain is just captivated by all of it, and it's soaking it in and it's learning so deeply. The fourth benefit is that it really does support our work toward goals and reaching our goals. Hyperfocus can serve as this powerful support when we're working toward both long and short-term goals, because when we can tap into that intense focus and that dedication to a specific project and objective, it helps us move forward. It keeps us moving forward. And then as we move forward, it builds momentum and reinforces that loop of dopamine in the pursuit of achieving the goal, creating more motivation as we get closer and closer to reaching it. So you have that kind of reinforcing loop. And then finally, number five is that hyperfocus offers just a greater chance for that genuine feeling of enjoyment. So many people, myself included, have talked about how that sense of hyperfocus is just a real experience of fulfillment and joy. When you can deeply engage in those activities that completely captivate your attention, it just feels good. And again, that too can create a positive feedback loop where the enjoyment of the task reinforces the hyperfocus, which keeps us moving forward on the goal or the project. So again, I share these benefits with a big caveat, asterisk, underline, that these are powerful benefits as long as we have the supports in place to help us work with the hyperfocus so that we don't get lost in all the obstacles that we talked about first. We want to make sure that we've set ourselves up for success so that we're using this for us. So we've explored potential pros and cons of being in hyperfocus. Now let's talk about what those supports are. How can we use them for us? What can we do to leverage hyperfocus in a way that works for us? Well, number one, we want to find your quote unquote just right level of difficult, level of challenge, and also get really clear on the goal or the project you're working toward. So as we talked about earlier, hyperfocus happens primarily when we are doing something we're interested in and we're engaged in and often challenged by. And this is really important for us to remember, and it's important for two key reasons. First, when we remember that hyperfocus happens when we're doing something that we're really engaged in, it helps us maintain a realistic expectation around when we can use hyperfocus, right? It's not something that we can just easily drop into anytime we want to. It's not just a flip of a switch, especially if we're not interested in the task. So it helps us keep our expectations in check. And then second, we can use this as a reminder to, as often as possible, intentionally choose the goals and agree to projects that do offer that level of challenge and that do feel engaging and fun? Or if you're feeling stuck, how do we bring in that right level of challenge? Is it a full body yes before you're agreeing to it? Check in, make sure. Number 2, after you've chosen your goal, you've gotten really specific on what it is, and you know that it is one that is incredibly engaging for you, we want to start breaking down the steps. So you could either just grab a piece of paper and a pen and jot down the steps to give your brain some direction. You could use something like Magic to Do and divide that goal or that project into smaller steps. I know you are all so sick of hearing me say this, but it's so powerful. Okay, breaking down the steps is key in so many ways. And with hyperfocus, it's especially important because hyperfocus is particularly effective when we're directed toward specific, well-defined tasks. So when we can break down the project into specific tasks, it helps our brain have a clear roadmap to get into that hyperfocus. It helps ensure that we're taking the steps forward that we need to and not getting distracted by the process. Number 3, the third thing we can do here to help us leverage hyperfocus for us is to create a supportive environment. So challenge yourself to create an environment that is really supportive of your brain and how you focus best, because it's going to differ for everybody. I know for myself, I can get into hyperfocus best when I am in a comfortable chair, when I have water at my desk, when I've taken care of my basic needs, like I've eaten food, I've moved, I've taken my meds, right? Those kinds of things before I sit down to work. I also know I need to be in a quiet space. My notifications have to be off. I don't have my phone nearby. And I also need to go full screen on my computer so I'm not tempted to start going through different tabs. Okay, that's the environment that's most supportive for my brain to quickly slip into hyperfocus, especially when I know the specific thing I'm working on and the steps I need to take. Now, for other people, it might be that working in a space like a coffee shop is more effective. Maybe complete silence does not feel supportive and you like the ambient noise. That feels really good. So allow yourself the space to experiment and find the environment that does feel really good for your brain. Also, if you haven't taken my free course on how to boost your focus and concentration, I highly suggest that you do so. Some of the strategies that I talk about in there will further what we're exploring here today. So I will link to that training in the show notes, or you can just head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/focus. But again, tip 3 is to create your ideal of a structured environment that minimizes distractions and helps to enable that sustained hyperfocus on whatever task you're doing. Tip 4 is to set time limits. So I encourage you to establish boundaries for yourself around the projects you're working on, because that's going to help prevent hyperfocus from creating excessive time distortion. So remember, hyperfocus makes it so easy to lose track of time. And because we're trying to harness hyperfocus in a way that's supportive of us, we need to remind our brain that the time is passing. So make sure that you set reasonable time limits for yourself and then make use of timers. I know I've mentioned many times on the podcast that I like my giant time timer. For those of you on YouTube, I am holding it up right here. I love to use this timer. It really helps to keep me on track. Again, I will link to it in the show notes, but it really helps me to maintain my awareness of that passing time. And then working hand in hand with setting the time limits is incorporating breaks to refresh your mind, to refresh your body. And that ultimately allows you to refocus and have sustained focus. So here's the deal. I know for myself, when I am in hyperfocus, that is when my brain most likely forgets that I'm a human and not a robot. Okay, when I am in hyperfocus, my brain is convinced I'm a robot. And that's why it's so important that I do set these timers and that I incorporate strategic breaks that allow me to stretch, to eat food, to drink water, to walk the dog, to look at something other than a screen so that my brain can recharge and reset. And then my last tip to really leverage hyperfocus for you is to both anticipate and allow time for transition in and out of hyperfocus. It is so important to remember that hyperfocus isn't that light switch that you can just turn on and off. In fact, if your brain struggles with cognitive flexibility quite a bit and shifting in and out of tasks like mine does, it absolutely takes time to ease in and out of the hyperfocus space. And when you can accept and then anticipate and then allow time for that transition, it's everything. So how do we do that? How do we allow time to transition in and out of hyperfocus? Well, we've talked about the importance of preparing for entering into hyperfocus in regard to getting really clear on your project and breaking down the steps and setting up your environment, right? But there are a few other ways that you can really help your brain with this transition as well. And the big one is before diving into your work, allowing yourself to potentially do some activities related to your main project, but it's not your specific main project because your brain might need some warm-up time. You might want to review some notes or set the stage for what you're going to do, break down the steps, outline what you're going to do, anything that's related to that main project. Essentially, you're creating an on-ramp. You're allowing your mind to safely gain speed to get into that hyper-focused state. In fact, I was just talking about this in We're Busy Being Awesome the other day. So many of us expect ourselves to be able to sit down and immediately, at the drop of a hat, get into hyperfocus. Not the drop of a hat, that's such a strange phrase, but just immediately pop into hyperfocus. That is like me expecting my car to go from a dead stop to 75 miles an hour in an instant. That is not how it works. My car literally can't do that. And this is why we have on-ramps onto the freeway. The same is true for your brain. You need that on-ramp. And the sooner we can get to a place of acceptance and anticipating that we need an on-ramp, we need supports to slowly get into the work, the quicker we can allow for it and put in some supports to make that acceleration as smooth as possible. So that's going to help us get into the work. How do we prepare for an exit? Okay, so we also want to have supports to exit our hyperfocus. This is equally crucial to maintaining that balance and creating space for other priorities in our life. So to help with transitions out of hyperfocus, it can be really supportive to include different signals or cues to your brain that indicate your work time is coming to a close. So again, this could be a timer or an alarm. For myself, I use my time timer and I set 2 different alarms. I have one that goes off at about 15 minutes left, so I kind of know the time is coming to an end. And then I have a 5-minute warning to help say, hey, wrap up those loose ends. We're just about done with work. And by having that clear endpoint with these gradual transitions, it allows us to slowly reduce our speed and get off the freeway safely, if we use that same analogy. Because again, needless to say, going from 75 miles an hour to 0 in an instant, well, technically possible, is not something you want to do in a car. The same is true for your brain. Okay, so allow yourself that time to transition. And then I will also mention that if you really struggle with transitions like I do, I mean, you've heard me talk about this on the podcast if you've been listening for a minute. Transitions are not my jam. I also encourage you to literally plan transitional activities after your hyperfocus. So that might look like going for a walk, dancing to music. I will link to my 2023 playlist if you need something to dance to. Doing yoga, doing meditation, journaling. Maybe you plan for the next day, whatever it is. Give yourself that gift of shifting your mind so you can be fully present in the next activity in your day. All right, there you have it, a deep dive into the world of hyperfocus. I know I just threw a whole lot at you, and I'm a fast talker, so let's do a quick recap. What is hyperfocus? Hyperfocus is more than just an intense ability to concentrate. It is a complete absorption into a task, one that we often find enjoyable or interesting and challenging to the point of tuning out everything else. There are both pros and cons to hyperfocus. It brings with it plenty of obstacles if it's left unchecked, time distortions, neglected responsibilities, potential impacts on our wellness, our relationships, its general unpredictability, and it brings the risk of burnout. And as we just talked about in episode 233, all about planning to fail, it's important to recognize these obstacles. We want to see them and know that they can happen so we can plan for them. Because on the other side, there are some benefits of hyperfocus too. Hyperfocus offers the opportunity for increased productivity. It creates space for greater creative thinking, for deep learning, for investment into our goals, and our overall enjoyment. Again, as long as we're setting ourselves up with the right supports. And then we talked about how you can leverage that hyperfocus with supports. And in the words of Ned Hallowell, make sure that you find your right kind of difficult. Select your goals and your projects intentionally so that they do align with your interests, so that they provide that right level of challenge, and then get really clear on what those goals are specifically and the steps so your brain knows what to focus on, right? Break down those steps into smaller tasks so your brain can easily focus on getting the thing done rather than figuring out the sequence. Also, create that supportive environment, one that allows you to minimize distractions and provides the optimal space to get into hyperfocus. Support yourself by setting time limits and incorporating strategic breaks. So establish those boundaries, use your time timers to help you prevent excessive time distortion, and stay on track and increase your time awareness, and then integrate those planned breaks so you can refresh your mind and your body and remember that you are a human and not a robot. And then anticipate and allow time for transitions. Okay, acknowledge that hyperfocus is not an on-off switch. It is not instant. Prepare for those gradual transitions in and out of this state. And you can do this by creating some activities that allow you to warm up to the event. Maybe you read through your notes, you break down some steps, you get in the right headspace, and then you have some exit strategies as well. You have your off-ramp. So maybe you use cues or signals or timers so your brain knows, hey, we're nearing the end of this work block, to create that smoother transition out of your hyperfocus state. And then if you're like me and you need a lot of time to shift, try planning some transitional activities for post hyperfocus so you can really shift and be present in the next area of focus as well. All right, my friends, that's going to do it for us this week. And if you want more support in learning how to harness your hyperfocus, navigate transitions, and work with your ADHD brain so you have more time for the things that you enjoy, I would love to have you join us in my small group coaching program, We're Busy Being Awesome. To learn more, you can head to the link in the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/group. And you can add your name to the waitlist when you're there. You'll be the first to know when enrollment opens for the next cohort. Also, don't forget to take my free course on how to boost your focus and concentration. It's broken down into short 3 to 5 minute videos. So if you have 5 minutes, you can put one of these practices to use today. Check it out through the show notes or head to I'mBusyBeingAwesome.com/focus. Until next time, keep being awesome. I'll talk with you soon.